Whenever the IELTS speaking test comes up in conversation, there's this common idea, isn't there? That, oh, that's the easy one, the bit you don't really need to stress about compared to, say, the writing.
Right. That's definitely a perception floating around.
Exactly. But the guide we're digging into today, well, it pushes back on that straight away. It makes it pretty clear that all four components of the IELTS listening, reading, writing, and speaking, they're actually designed to be at the same level of difficulty.
Mm-hmm. The challenge is meant to be consistent across the board.
So what makes one feel easier or harder really just boils down to you, the test taker. It's about your own background, your strengths, your comfort level with that particular skill,
Makes sense. Your mileage may vary, essentially.
Precisely. So our mission today is to really unpack what this guide reveals about the speaking test specifically.
Yeah.
What's really going on under the hood, and how can you approach it in the most effective way?
Okay, so diving right in, the guide gives a really clear snapshot of the structure first, which is, well, fundamental to understanding anything else about it. It's quite short, actually.
Oh, really? How short?
The whole thing lasts between 10 and 16 minutes. That's it. And it's split into 3 very distinct parts.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. So you kick off with part 1. This runs about 4 to 6 minutes. It's basically a warm-up with the examiner asking pretty straightforward questions about your work, studies, hobbies, where you live, that kind of everyday stuff. Familiar ground.
Right, easing you in.
Exactly. Then you move into part 2. This bit is shorter, maybe 3 to 4 minutes total. You're given a topic card, usually asking you to describe something, a person, a place, an experience, often something quite personal.
The long turn.
That's the one. You get exactly 1 minute to jot down some notes and prepare. Then you have to speak about that topic for up to 2 minutes.
1 minute prep for 2 minutes talk.
Uh,
Sounds intense.
It can be. It tests your ability to organize thoughts quickly and speak continuously. And then, finally, there's part 3. This also lasts around 4 to 6 minutes. Here, the examiner asks broader, more abstract discussion questions that are thematically linked to whatever topic you discussed in part 2.
So it builds on the previous part.
Yes, it pushes you towards more complex ideas, opinions, speculation. It's less personal, more analytical. The guide also points out something important. The questions themselves are standardized. Everyone taking the test on a particular day gets the same set of questions.
Okay. But the timing varies. You said 10 to 16 minutes.
Right, because the total time depends on how long you speak for your answers. If you give very short answers, it might be closer to 10 minutes. Longer, more developed answers will push it towards 16. And crucially, the examiner isn't participating in a chat. They're assessing you based on specific criteria, and the whole thing is recorded for moderation purposes.
Okay, that structure makes sense. So given that framework, the warm-up, the long turn, the deeper discussion, what exactly is that examiner listening for? How are they deciding your score?
Good question. The guide spells out 4 key assessment criteria. Think of them as 4 pillars, and each one carries exactly the same weight, 25% of your total score.
Okay, what are they?
First up is fluency and coherence. This isn't just about speaking quickly, it's about speaking smoothly, without unnatural hesitation, and linking your ideas logically so the listener can follow easily. Using cohesive devices like however also, as a result, fits in here.
Right, making it flow. What's next?
Second is lexical resource, fancy term for vocabulary, basically. But it's not just about having big words. It's about using a good range of vocabulary appropriately and accurately for the topic. Using idiomatic language correctly also scores points here.
So, the right words in the right places. Got it.
Third is grammatical range and accuracy. Again, range and accuracy. You need to show you can use a variety of sentence structures, simple, compound, complex, and use them correctly. Obviously, fewer grammatical errors means a higher score.
Makes sense. And the fourth?
The fourth pillar is pronunciation. And we'll probably circle back to this, but the guide stresses it's about being understandable. It covers individual sounds, word stress, sentence stress, intonation, all the features that make your speech clear and easy to follow, not necessarily having a specific accent.
Okay. Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. Each 25%. That's a really clear breakdown.
It is. And the guide has a really practical piece of advice here. It points out that making improvements gets noticeably harder as you move up the band scores. Like jumping from a 6 to a 6.5 might be easier than jumping from a 7 to a 7.5 or an 8.
Ah, diminishing returns almost.
Sort of, yeah.
It'll-
So the most efficient way to boost your overall score, especially if you're aiming high, is to figure out which of those 4 areas is your weakest and really focus your practice efforts there. Don't just vaguely practice speaking. Target your specific area for improvement.
That's very strategic advice. Okay, let's pivot to preparation then. This seems crucial. What does the guide absolutely insist on? What's the non-negotiable element for getting ready for this test?
It's stated very, very clearly. There is, and the guide emphasizes this, no substitute for actually practicing speaking.
Right. You can't just read about it or do grammar exercises.
Exactly. The guide specifically mentions that a lot of candidates spend ages on reading, writing drills, grammar books, which are all useful for English generally, but they neglect the specific act of producing spoken language under timed conditions. You have to open your mouth and speak a lot.
So how does the guide suggest doing that effectively? Just talking to yourself?
Well, that can help, but it suggests more structured methods. One highly recommended approach is to watch videos of other candidates, particularly those who scored well, band 7 or higher on platforms like YouTube.
Why watching others?
Because it gives you a concrete model. You can see how they structure their answers, what kind of vocabulary and grammar they use, how they manage fluency, how they handle the different parts of the test. It's like watching game film for athletes.
That makes a lot of sense. What else?
Feedback is highlighted as critical. Ideally, getting feedback from someone who really understands the IELTS scoring criteria, a teacher, a tutor, maybe an experienced study partner. They can point out what you need to start doing, stop doing, or do more of, specifically in relation to those 4 criteria.
Right. Objective feedback on your weak spots.
Precisely. And if you don't have access to that, the guide strongly recommends recording yourself speaking. Answer sample questions, record it on your phone, whatever. Then, and this is the tough but valuable part, listen back and even transcribe what you said.
Ooh, transcribing sounds painful but useful.
It really is, because it forces you to notice the hesitations, the grammar mistakes, the vocabulary repetitions, the pronunciation issues that you just don't catch while you're speaking. It makes you confront your own patterns.
That's a powerful self-study technique. Anything else on prep?
Just a reminder, tied back to the scoring. Remember that lexical resource and grammatical range and accuracy together make up a full 50% of your score. So while fluency and pronunciation are vital, dedicating serious effort to expanding your vocabulary and mastering complex grammar structures pays off significantly on the scorecard.
Right. Half the marks right there. Okay, so you've done the prep, you've practiced speaking, you've maybe even transcribed yourself. Now it's test day. Let's talk about performance during the actual test. What key tips does the guide offer? You mentioned pronunciation earlier. The guide makes an interesting distinction about accent, right?
Yes. This is a huge one because it causes so much anxiety for test takers. The guide is very explicit. Your accent itself is not assessed. What is assessed is your pronunciation.
Okay, what's the difference in their view?
Pronunciation is about clarity and intelligibility. Can the examiner understand you easily? This involves correctly forming individual sounds, phonemes, using appropriate word stress, emphasizing the right syllable like important, not important, sentence stress, emphasizing keywords in a sentence for meaning, and using intonation patterns naturally, the rise and fall of your voice.
So it's about being clear, not about sounding like a native speaker from a specific country.
Exactly. Whether you have an American, Australian, Indian, Nigerian, Scottish accent, whatever, it doesn't matter, as long as your pronunciation within that accent is clear enough not to impede understanding. Trying to fake an accent you don't have is usually a bad idea, actually. It often sounds unnatural and can introduce more errors.
That's really reassuring, I think. What about hesitations? Is it bad to pause?
The guide makes another important distinction here. Natural, controlled hesitation, pausing for a moment to think or search for the right word, is perfectly normal and acceptable. It shows you're thinking. What you want to avoid are excessive fillers like constant air, or very long silent pauses that break the flow completely.
So a short pause is okay, but too many ums are not.
Right. And the guide actually suggests using some strategic thinking phrases if you need a moment. Things like, that's an interesting question, or let me think about that for a second, or, well, it's difficult to say precisely, but these sound much better than, and give you a second to gather your thoughts.
Ah, using phrases to buy thinking time. Clever. What else? There was something surprising in the guide about truthfulness.
Yes. This often surprises people. The guide points out that your answers don't actually need to be true or factually accurate
Really, you can just make things up.
within reason. The examiner isn't there to fact-check your life story or your opinions. They are assessing your ability to communicate in English about a given topic. So the answer needs to be relevant, believable, and well-expressed using good vocabulary and grammar. If inventing a small detail or slightly altering an experience helps you give a fuller, more fluent answer, that's perfectly fine.
So focus on the how, not necessarily the what.
Precisely. It's a language test, not a knowledge test or a lie detector test. And linked to that, the guide mentions mistakes. Small slips in grammar or vocabulary are expected, especially under pressure. Don't panic and stop speaking every time you make a tiny error.
Just keep going.
Generally, yes. If it's a minor slip that doesn't really affect understanding, it's often better to maintain your fluency and coherence. Constantly interrupting yourself to correct tiny errors can hurt your fluency score more than the original mistake would have hurt your grammar or vocab score. However, if you make a bigger error that clearly confuses the meaning, then yes, quickly correcting yourself, what I mean is a good idea.
That's a good balancing act to keep in mind. Anything else for test day?
One small, maybe unexpected tip the guide mentions is to try and smile. Not a fake, plastered-on grin, but just trying to appear reasonably relaxed and positive.
How does smiling help?
Well, psychologically, it can help you feel a bit more confident, but physically, the act of smiling can actually subtly affect your mouth position and potentially make your pronunciation a little clearer and your tone of voice more engaging and pleasant for the listener or the examiner. It contributes to that overall positive communication impression.
Interesting, the physical aspect of it. Okay, so those are some great general tips. Now, the guide also dives into specifics for each part, right? Parts 1, 2, and 3.
It does, yeah. It doesn't just give general advice, it provides tailored strategies. For example, for part 1, it generally advises giving answers that are, reasonably developed, but not super long, maybe 2 or 3 sentences, answering the question directly and adding a little detail or reason. You don't want one-word answers, but you also don't want mini speeches.
Keeping it concise but complete.
Right. For part 2, the long turn, the focus is on using that 1-minute prep time effectively to structure your talk. Maybe jotting down key points for introduction, main body points, and conclusion. And using linking words to make the 2-minute talk flow logically.
Structure that mini presentation.
Exactly. And then for part 3, the more abstract discussion, the guide emphasizes the need for more developed answers, showing you can handle complex ideas. It suggests things like comparing, contrasting, speculating, giving opinions with justification. It even offers a potential structure for some Part 3 answers, something like state your main idea, provide supporting detail, give specific examples, and maybe even consider alternatives or opposing views.
Idea, detail, specifics, alternatives. That sounds like a useful framework for those tougher questions.
It can be, yeah. A way to make sure your answer is well-rounded. And beyond the strategies, the guide also apparently lists quite a few online resources, specific websites, video channels, apps, even podcasts that candidates can use for targeted speaking practice.
So lots of practical tools recommended too.
Definitely. It seems very focused on giving actionable advice, not just theory.
It really sounds like this guide does a thorough job of, well, demystifying the IELTS speaking test, taking it from that vague, oh, it's the easy part notion, to showing you the actual engine underneath the scoring, the expectations, the specific skills being tested in each section.
Absolutely. It pulls back the curtain, as you said earlier. It makes it clear that success isn't just about, knowing English in a general sense. It's about mastering how to demonstrate your specific language abilities, your fluency, your vocabulary range, your grammar control, your clarity of pronunciation within the particular constraints and demands of this quite unique test format.
Yeah, that format is interesting when you think about it, moving from those quick personal questions in part 1 to the prepared monologue in part 2, and then into that more complex interactive discussion in part 3. It really makes you wonder about the design, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, why structure it that way? What specific communication muscles is that progression actually designed to test? Is it just about covering different interaction types, or does that specific sequence encourage you as a learner to develop something more than just, basic conversational ability?
That's a fascinating point to consider. I mean, you could argue that the structure intentionally pushes you. Part one checks basic fluency on familiar topics. Part two tests your ability to organize thoughts and sustain speech independently. And part three demands higher order thinking, analyzing, comparing, speculating, justifying opinions on more abstract issues, interacting spontaneously based on the examiner's prompts.
Right, so it's not accidental. The structure itself is a teaching tool,
Yeah.
almost.
You could see it that way. It forces you to practice and demonstrate different facets of communication competence. Think about it structuring a coherent 2-minute talk under pressure, or debating abstract societal trends. These are valuable skills beyond just passing a test. The artificiality of the test structure encourages very specific and arguably quite useful communication behaviors, like managing discourse, using nuanced language, handling interactional challenges.
Hmm. Something to definitely chew on as you're going through that prep, watching those videos, maybe transcribing yourself. It's not just about ticking boxes for the 4 criteria, but understanding why the test is set up the way it is.
Exactly. Understanding the why can inform the how of your preparation.
Well, hopefully this deep dive has given you some solid, actionable insights from the guide to get you started or refine your approach to tackling the IELTS speaking test.